Hey there, and welcome to Becoming a Bowhunter. I'm your host, Matty, and join me and our guests as we take the quality of meat back into our own hands, searching the wild for free-ranged animals to harvest as ethically as we can. I interview a variety of specialists from the bow hunting community to help fast-track your journey as a bow hunter. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this chinwag on one of your favorite topics in the world, bow hunting. Good stuff. Well, welcome, mate, and thank you very much for having me. For the listeners, I am here with Shane Chater of Bowhunters Domain. So I've popped around to your house, and I've been using your shafts and your arrows for probably the last 6 months. And what happened was I was using an Easton's Powerflight, and I was just shooting the backyard one day, and I took a shot, and the arrow exploded, just popped on me, and it was I counted myself incredibly lucky because it didn't end up in my hand, which was nice. But there's definitely, I think, stories and pictures that you see online of that sort of stuff happening, and because of that, it made me think, well, hold up, there's something going on here. Like, my arrows aren't maybe good enough for what I have running here in regards to my bow. So what I wanted to make sure is that I had something that I could have full confidence in, and something that I would know would be a good setup for the animals that I'm hunting, for the critters that I'm after. So first of all, Shane, welcome.
Hi, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. So thank you very much for that. But yeah, I mean, what I'd love to do for today is really just kind of talk about arrows and get a real understanding for bow hunters. Like, it took me probably a good 6 months before I even looked into arrows, and I bought multiple shafts, multiple types of arrows, and didn't understand that obviously there's going to be a big difference between a 250 spine compared to a 500 spine. Like, I didn't understand what any of that was, and it took a little bit of reading and stuff to kind of have an understanding for it. But what I'd really kind of love to dive into is, I guess, everything on the arrow first of all. But maybe before we do, give us a little background on yourself. How'd you get into this? How did you start Bowhunters Domain?
Oh, I've been hunting for a little while now with the bow. Originally started with a rifle, but found the love for the bow probably 9-10 years ago.
Yep.
And from there, it's just escalated into what it is today. Bowhunters generally started just because I got sick of the inconsistency in what I was buying. Finding 2 or 3 in a dozen that weren't flying quite right, or it wasn't very accurate over 40 for some reason. Especially with the broadhead, made a big difference. But yeah, it is what it is today. Hand selected arrows, and yeah. Yeah, and
we were just talking about that before we actually started the conversation of when you buy 12 arrows, like, you expect the 12 arrows to be on point. You don't want to find that 3 of them don't work.
Yeah, definitely. You need consistency, but you don't. Being a new archer, you're not really used to having to select, or you think you should be believing what they're selling you, but sometimes it just doesn't work that way. And
I mean, obviously you want to take note of the arrows that you're shooting, but it's not necessarily great to have to number each one of your arrows and try to remember what that arrow does at that point in time. Like, that's not probably a consistent piece. No,
not when you got a box full of them and you're trying to be consistent, and you obviously send them one out and it's flying differently than the others, and you start second guessing yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to remember that stuff when you're in front of an animal.
Yeah, definitely.
It's the stress of it all can come undone pretty quickly. So what I love is maybe just to kind of give a rundown of what consists, or what makes up an arrow.
What makes up an arrow? Obviously, nock, insert, and spine and straightness. The spine and straightness are the main issues within bow hunting, or just in general. Spine coming down to the deflection of spine on what you need to shoot out your 70, 60 or 50 pound compound bow.
What do you mean, deflection of spine?
There's something called Archer's paradox, where obviously someone back in the day figured out how much an arrow needs to flex before it will correct itself, and if it flexes too much, it's too weak a spine. If it flexes too stiff, it's a too stiff a spine. Archer's paradox is a set number, like your 300 will flex at 0.300 of an inch, under 2 pounds at 26 inches apart, which is consistent to that 300 spine.
Okay. And so what does that mean for someone who's shooting a 40-pound bow compared to someone who's shooting a 70-pound bow?
So at 70 pounds, a 300 spine won't will flex more, but at 40 pounds, you shoot a 300 spine, it won't flex at all.
Okay. And so that means that it's not going to shoot as accurately as it should?
No, it'll be like shooting a steel stick. So it probably won't correct itself properly, or it'll just be too heavy or be inconsistent.
It's like trying to throw a javelin if you've never done it before, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
But I mean, so outside of that, so you realistically, you have to be looking at the pound bow that you're shooting before you can say this spine is the spine you should be using.
Yeah, definitely. You got to look at poundage, broadhead weight, half cert weight, and arrow length for that arrow to fly correctly.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's a lot of talk around at the moment, and we'll get to it eventually, of FOC, but also of heavy arrows, and people talking a lot about heavy arrows and kind of the magic behind the heavy arrows. But to some extent, like, you can have an arrow that's too heavy where it starts to affect your speed and affect the flight pattern, right? Or the flight path.
Yeah, you can have too heavy over a certain distance. You'll notice it over probably 30, 40, a massive drop.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess it depends on what you're using it for, but a lot of the time people are going heavier arrows because they want to go hunting, so...
Yeah, heavy arrows kind of... the whole FOC thing kind of helps an arrow flight as well, so slightly heavier at the front will make a bad bow fly better.
Mm-hmm. I remember hearing, I think it was on a video maybe, or it might have been a podcast with Cam Haynes, and he was talking about how he came here to start shooting. I think he was shooting at some fallow deer once, and he took a shot, and the deer pretty much looked at him and took a few steps, and then his arrow passed it. He's like, "What the hell?" Like, all the stuff that he'd been shooting at wasn't moving in the distance where he was shooting. Like, his arrows were incredibly heavy and moving reasonably slow, whereas this deer noticed him and moved in the time that he'd taken his shot, and he was just so blown away by it. So he had to completely change his setup here for the Australian animals compared to what he would have back in America.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just weight of arrow slowed it down, and noise of bow, I suppose, a deer being so elusive and freakish, they just get out of the way.
Yeah, very skittish animals. When it comes to bow sound, you can change that via the arrows that you're shooting.
Sound is generally... A heavier arrow will make a bow shoot quieter.
Mm-hmm.
It will help a little bit with the noise that the bow makes. Arrow noise is another thing, but you can't really change too much unless you put string whiskers and stuff like that on that to quieten the bow down on shot.
Yeah.
But generally, a heavy arrow will make a bow super quiet. Okay.
And so, I mean, getting back to, obviously we talked about the shaft as one thing. Like, you've got a few measurement points you need to figure out when it comes to bow hunting, or when it comes to shooting an arrow anyway for you. So obviously one is going to be draw length. What's, like, say for instance you've got a draw length of 26, does that mean that you need to have a 26-inch arrow?
Generally, no. A lot of people like to run an arrow really tight up next to their riser, so if they are 26-inch, they might be 26.5-inch arrow to arrow, carbon to carbon, or knock throat to carbon. It is sometimes, obviously with a 300 spine, when it's cut down to 26-inch, it's going to be a lot stiffer at 70 pounds. Sometimes it's worth having that arrow a little bit longer just to get that archer's paradox moving, so that arrow can actually flex a little bit and correct itself a little bit faster. It is possible to go too stiff, especially with making a shorter arrow. So in that case, say if someone was shooting 70 pounds at 26-inch arrow, carbon to carbon, you'd pretty much shoot a 350 spine. Okay. Because obviously it's a weaker spine, but it's a shorter spine, so it's going to flex to correct that arrow a bit better.
So what would be some signs that maybe your arrows aren't built right for your bow? If you're practicing in the backyard or something like that, you're going to the range and there's things that are happening with your shots.
You'll probably see that if at the range or you're shooting like a 3D target, you'll find that arrows are sitting in sideways, maybe underspined, or in flight you might see a little bit of a walk in it, like a bit of a whoop.
What do you mean underspined?
Underspined, let's say we're shooting a 400 spine arrow with 125 out of 70 pounds at 29-inch. Your arrow will flex too much, so it will pretty much look like it's turning sideways in the air at a shot at 40. You'll see incorrect arrow flight. And then, obviously, by fixing that, you can shorten the arrow. If you're 26-inch draw, you could knock all the way down the 26-inch, or if it was longer, or step up a different spine of arrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so corkscrewing, if you see the tail kind of corkscrewing around, that's kind of a similar sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. It's either got to do with spine of arrow, or you could be getting fletch contact, or a couple of other things.
Yeah.
But generally there's spine gauges or spine sheets and charts out there that you can work on.
Mm-hmm.
They are a pretty rough kind of guess, but because of the way arrows are batched and stuff, but you can work on a spine gauge or a spine chart, figure out roughly where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can be a little bit over or under, but generally you can pick it by just using a spine chart.
And so what's kind of the minimum spine someone should be using for hunting?
It all comes down to what bow they're shooting, really. Like, it comes down to poundage and broadhead weight, and if they're running a half cert, or the weight of the half cert.
Mm-hmm. So if, like, say, for instance, the difference, obviously, between a compound bow and a recurve bow,
Yep.
what sort of differences are you going to see there when it comes to shooting, like getting an arrow that's correct for you?
Obviously, speed is a
Big difference.
big difference with the recurve and longbows, and then you've got the aggressive on how fast that shot is, because the cams are really aggressive on a compound bow.
Yeah.
Generally, you can step up poundage, like 80-pound longbow would shoot a 300 spine arrow kind of thing, just because they're not as aggressive as what a compound bow would be.
Yeah.
So you can run more heavier weight on a recurve than you can really in a compound at 70 pounds kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess a big thing to kind of take into note is when you pull back your bow, whether it's your compound or your recurve, you've got a lot of potential energy there. Like, where you set back to is that's like all the potential energy that you can send into the arrow. Obviously, parts of the camel parts of your bow, like your limbs and bits and pieces, are going to take up part of that. What dictates, like, obviously it comes down to tackle and the stuff you're actually using, but what dictates like the best flight pattern for that arrow?
Using field points, I suppose you're not really looking for big veins or veins that can control, because the field point's not really affecting the dynamic spine across. But when you step up into broadheads or a large fixed blade, you're looking for some sort of control in the rear end to get that arrow spinning and to correct itself faster. So a decent stiff vein or a good profile vein is something to look for to control that energy and to control that arrow as it comes out of that bow.
And so when it comes to veins, like, I mean, there's 3 veins, there's 4 veins, there's feathers compared to your plastics, or are they plastic?
Yeah, they're some sort of plastic.
Yeah.
Some sort, yeah.
So, I mean, when it comes to that, like, there's also different lengths and different heights. Like, what's the best that you've come across? And obviously this is pretty subjective because it's based on your gear, but what's the best that you've had the most accuracy with?
I've had the most success with the boning bolt veins so far, just because of how stiff they are. Fair enough. They are made for crossbows, so they're made for high velocity.
Yeah. They're like a longer vein.
3.5 inch they are.
Yeah.
But having said that, I've had success with 2-inch blazers over the years using mechanicals as well. But I just prefer the 3.5 inch bolt vein now, because it seems to control a fixed blade really well.
Okay. And so between seeing like a bolt vein or what was the other one? The blazer, do you see a lot of difference in accuracy?
Yeah, I believe I do with a broadhead. I do.
Yeah. Whereas on a field point, you wouldn't see the
you wouldn't see that major issue, because you haven't got a 1/2 inch hanging out each side of a broadhead working on the dynamic spine. So the blazers just seem like they lay down a little bit and maybe not control as much, where the bolt veins just get that arrow spinning as fast as possible.
Yeah. Now, we were talking about beforehand on the difference between 3 and 4 veins on an arrow, and you were just saying that with the bolts that you were finding it was hitting the like it was just affecting the flight pattern because your veins were hitting.
Yeah, I found on one of my bows, an APA, it just seems like my clearance is a lot smaller. So between the rest and the riser and the bus cables and stuff like that, I get real small clearances on where it tunes in, where it likes to paper tune. So the slightest little movement left or right on the knock to try and to equal out that 4 vein, I couldn't do it. It was either hitting the rest on the way through, or it was hitting the bus cable on the top. So the 4 veins kind of really make it hard to tune in on the knock to try and clear on fletch contact, especially with that bow. So not every bow is the same with where they tune in and how they sit, especially how far the actual The rest sits away from the riser. Some sit further out, some sit closer in. But just with that bow itself, I was finding it really hard to get some sort of clearance.
Yeah, okay. And, I mean, there's obviously a few other things that come into the arrow. So things like wraps when it comes to using a wrap. And we were talking about this before, and you were saying purely just for ease of cleaning the shaft.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's you damage a vein, you can pretty much just heat the wrap up in some hot water, peel the thing off and roll a new one on, and you're ready to go. You're not scraping carbon with a scraper or a knife or anything like that. You're not going to damage your carbon. You're not leaving any super glue or any kind of residual on top of the carbon, which would give you a reason to scrape it down.
I had a lot of people saying veggie peelers are their favourite thing to use.
Yeah. Veggie peelers or a butter knife.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've just gone through that process where I'd bought multiple arrows from you. Some I had set up with a wrap, some I had set up without the wrap. And I didn't think there'd be any difference in the arrow, but they flew completely different.
Yeah, a little bit of weight difference. I think my wraps come in about 8-9 grain each.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it threw my arrows. It was more so on the longer shots, like the 20 meters wasn't too bad, but as soon as I got to 30 and upwards, it threw them out quite a lot. So I had to go and just completely retune, which is fine. And it's something that I wanted to do was transfer to the wraps because it makes it a little bit easier in the country that I'm in to be able to see them.
Yeah, the wraps make them stand out a lot easier to pick up.
Yeah, definitely. Nocks. When it comes to nocks, what dictates a good knock compared to what's a bad knock? Is there such thing, and what are they going to do as a difference to your flight of your arrow?
I don't think knock's going to have too much of an issue with flight of arrow. I've always used Eastern X-Knocks or just an Eastern brand or a boning brand. I've never really dipped into the cheaper knocks just because it's taking all the energy, so it has to be a name brand and it has to perform every time. The last thing you want's a cheap knock on the rear end of your arrow, and as soon as you shoot, it blows up on you, or you can blow a bow because of a cheap knock or something like that. So I stick with the name branded knocks.
Tested and proven, really. Yeah. Now, something that people do talk about is knock tuning, which is essentially just where you rotate your knock to try to get a different flight pattern out of your arrow.
Yep.
Would that happen if you've got consistency in your arrows?
I don't think so, no. I've never had to knock tune any of my bows, especially that I select all my carbon shafts on the analyzer. I've never had an issue apart from obviously paper tuning with knock high, knock low, but knock tuning a broadhead. I physically glue my broadheads in on my half sets so they're vertically up and down. So at that point, with a straight arrow and a consistent spine, you find every arrow flies the same.
I always wondered how people did that. I thought it was just that you unscrewed it and screwed it up again until you found it was vertical.
No, we're cheating and super gluing them in place, and that broadhead stays with that arrow then.
Yeah, it's just stuck in place. But, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because it's not that often you're going to be changing your broadheads around if you're not going through them. Yeah.
If you only got 6 arrows, you got 6 broadheads, you might as well just super glue them together and use your other half dozen for target. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, when it comes to sighting them in, are you pretty much sighting them in and then you're leaving them? You're not shooting them again with your broadheads, or are you practicing with your broadheads a bit?
I generally just sight in for 30, 40, 50, and then I'll shoot a sighted target, then I'll send a broadhead off to a broadhead butt of some sort, like a foam goat or something, or just a foam butt, and just make sure I'm hitting the same kind of 2-3 inch circle.
Yeah,
and that's where I'll leave them.
Yeah, when I'm practicing, I'll usually do like 3 field points to one broadhead.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just go out in the backyard and shoot my broadhead first, and then shoot around it. Make sure I'm not shooting the same target, because there's something really painful as an archer when you shoot through an arrow, or when you injure your own arrow.
Yeah, you cut one in half with a broadhead.
Yeah, exactly. It's or even, you know what's frustrating? Even just hitting the fletchings, like the veins.
A vein up or two.
Yeah,
you're gonna start again.
Yeah, something like that is frustrating enough. And I mean, obviously, something that we love is the sport is like just doing it in general. But one thing that it is very time consuming in general. So doing things like refletching arrows is a process, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It takes a little bit of time and preparation and getting it right.
Yeah. Let's have a talk about about half certs, inserts, bits and pieces there. Like, what are you looking for there? What's the point of having a sleeve compared to having a half cert?
Oh, the half set has proven itself, but what can happen with the half set, it can actually punch back up inside the carbon and splinter the carbon slightly. But with the half set and sleeve, where the actual sleeve is protecting the carbon by about 15 mil or so, 20 mil, and that would stop the actual carbon from mushrooming, so you don't get the punch back into the physical carbon. So you, in theory, if it's going to break, it's going to be behind the half cert. It's just not going to punch itself inside the carbon if you hit something hard.
So I've actually got one where it's just popped out. Like I said, I've got a broadhead that's missing in my target somewhere. So I have to be careful because every once in a while I'll shoot and I'll damage my broadheads, but because I'll hit the other broadhead. But what happened was essentially like the shaft is now completely, it's just back to fresh.
Yep.
Where the insert's fallen out on the inside, or it broke, it snapped in the middle, and the broadhead is just stuck in place. So with that, would you be able to just reinsert that and that would be fine to keep shooting?
Yep, definitely.
And so at what point does it dictate that you should not shoot an arrow?
Any kind of nick or mark on the carbon. So if you've been shooting target, or if you send two broadheads in next to each other and you rip a little bit of carbon off, you shouldn't be shooting that arrow at all, because you've kind of hurt its sidewall. It's just going to snap or carry on, or it's going to fly differently without that little piece of carbon. Carbon shafts can explode, as you were saying earlier. You've seen it happen to yourself with a power flight.
Yeah, it
may have been damaged, or you may have damaged or dropped or stood on it or bent it the wrong way, and it's just gone off on shot. That's the last thing you want.
And like I've heard of people who will throw away two arrows if they shoot one into the other. They'll throw them both away.
As soon as you're Robin Hood, and you may as well throw them both away.
Yeah, just purely for that safety factor.
Safety. The last thing you want to do is a bow to go off with a broken arrow, and it's just pretty much a dry fire.
Yeah, so I mean safety for your gear, but also safety for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Don't want an arrow through the hand
safety
ever.
For your neighbours. It's not getting sent over the fence.
Especially in us suburban crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so in regards to your inserts then, obviously you've got different weights.
Yeah, I got the 90 grain half certs and the stainless. I find that gets the arrow up to what people were liking to shoot at certain spines. So the 90 grain and a 125 up the front generally gets you around about the 600 grain arrow at 29 inch, which a lot of people are shooting the 550 to 600s in 250 spines, and that's a pretty common weight. And then with bringing the 55 grain half set and sleeve out, it brought people under the 500 if they want to shoot under that 500 with a little bit of protection at the front.
Yeah.
But having said that, you can still run a 150 up the front and pick up that 600 grain arrow if you really want.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of little ways you can do things, but it depends. All comes down to what people are shooting with their broadheads, really.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So when it comes to actually creating an arrow, so for instance, if they were to come to you and just buy the shafts by themselves, they're also going to have to look at getting a fair few extras in play with that. So they have to get the inserts. Yep.
Inserts. Figure out which they want to shoot, half set sleeves or the 90 grain half sets. Then obviously broadhead weight, arrow length, and poundage and stuff like that. Work on what arrow they're going to pick, either 250, 300, 350, or 400. So it all comes down to different spines at that point. So getting the correct setup arrow to start with is pretty much ideal, instead of trying to poke around in the dark and do the wrong thing. But try and push people in the right direction to start with. So
yeah, well, I mean, for me, I actually just reached out because I wasn't too sure on what I would use. So I just said, "Hey, mate, this is my bow, this is my draw length, this is what I'm aiming to do with it." And you said, "Yeah, go the 250s this length, like keep it at that." And
I think you're a 31 inch arrow or something like that.
Yeah,
125 and a 90 grain. So yeah, definitely in the 250 spawn. Yeah.
Just and like realistically, like I said, it gave me real confidence in my setup. Previously, I would go out shooting and I would be hoping it would go through the animal, but we just weighed my arrow and it's 615.
Yep.
Thereabouts. Yeah. And you were saying that would pretty much blow through a red, which is
it blows through just about anything in Australia.
Yeah, which is great.
Nothing would stop it. Even the old water tank would take a hit.
Yeah, good. That fills me with a lot of confidence, which is good. And I mean, when I actually took a shot at a deer a few weeks ago, but my sight was not in properly, and it went low, And I just never found that arrow again. There was no finding that arrow because it was just buried. It was gone, which is frustrating. But you got a broadhead on the front. It's just a freaking tank digging into the ground.
Yeah, pretty much. You start counting the dollar signs as it disappears under the grass.
Yeah, exactly. Once you put the broadhead on as well, they just they don't get cheap at all. No. It's one of those things. And my brother, I'm always really happy to shoot my bow with others and give them a crack at it. Just so like I want to share archery with people because it's given me so much. And I took it to the farm when my brother was there, and he took some shots, and I think he buried 3 arrows. And I was like, it's just
It wouldn't be the first.
No, exactly. But that's always
metal detector would find them.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe that's what I could bring in.
Yeah.
Excellent. So actually coming to doing a self job at home. So once they've got their shaft sorted and you've got your inserts and everything in place, when it comes to wrapping and putting on your vanes, there's obviously your different bits and pieces you can use, like your bowing jigs.
Yep.
There's the metal and there's the plastic. Oh, these are still metal, aren't they?
No,
they're
plastic.
All
plastic. The Bowhunting Pro jigs are all plastic. Yeah.
Is there a big difference between using your plastic jig compared to your metal jig?
I've just had a lot of success with the boning plastic jigs over the metal jigs. I've always used the boning. I suppose it's something that I'm used to using.
Yeah.
I do have a metal jig here, but I haven't had that much to do with it. It just seems heavy and it just annoys me a little bit. You've got I think they call them Bitzenberg jigs as well. I believe they're all metal. It all comes down to personal preference on what you want to fletch with. If you like using a certain jig, use it. But yeah, I've always had really good success with the boning jigs.
Yeah. And so how would someone choose whether they want to do 3 or 4 vanes straight up?
All personal preference. If they want, obviously a 4-vane arrow is gonna make that arrow spin and carry on like rifling down the range, and the 3 vanes probably not gonna spin as much. But you're gonna remember that by putting vanes on the rear, you're adding to your spine as well. By adding heavier weight, you're taking away from your FOC. By adding, say, the boning vane at the back, you're putting 11.6 grain at the back, which is taken away from your 90 grain half set. So you've just taken that FOC away a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
So you're equaling the arrow out and you're not ending up with as much FOC.
Yeah.
But having said that, it all comes down to personal preference, 3 vanes to 4 vanes. I'll stick with 3 vanes for myself. I've dipped into the 4 vanes, had a bit of an issue with clearance, but yeah, that's just that bow.
So, in regards to the clearance, how do you know that was an issue?
I was getting marks on my risers and my strings, and on my drop away, I was getting a little white mark from the white vane.
Okay.
So, and just 1 and 3 arrow might just act a little bit funny, and I couldn't figure out why it was doing it until I looked a bit deeper. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've actually heard of that happening for a few people, and instead of changing their vanes around, what they'll do is they'll just turn it a little bit, like turn the nocks just so it doesn't.
Yep. Just to get a little bit of clearance. Like I had clearance, but I had to be pretty much bang on where the nock was sitting. And it was just too hard to judge, especially in a hunting situation. If you knock an arrow the wrong way, it's just not going to get clearance. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And so, I mean, you obviously... I was watching some videos last night because I started playing around with it for the first time myself with actually putting the wraps on, putting the vanes on and stuff. I haven't actually put any vanes on yet because I need to get some glue. But with the vanes, like, I was watching a video and it was John Dudley, and he's literally got like this mat that you can use as a rolling mat. But all I used was a magazine. It was fine. It's just
same thing.
Something that's kind of soft that you can put your arrow onto and be able to roll it in place. And really, it just comes down to lining it up and using eyesight, right?
Yeah, definitely. To line it up on your nock and just roll it on slowly and just place a little bit of pressure and it just rolls straight on. Yeah,
and then
mouse pad or something like that.
One thing that he was very clear on was making sure you don't have any residue on your hands. So getting rid of any oil, making sure you've got clean hands, you've got a clean surface. So cleaning the actual surface that you're about to stick onto as well.
Yep.
It seems like common sense, but it's like if you're out and about and you've got grease on your hands or something like that, and you just want to go do your arrows real quick, it can be a quick stuff up that could stuff up your whole arrow.
Definitely with wraps, if you're going to handle them, or if you handle them too much, you'll find that there might be oil residue or just your daily grind on your hands, and it will actually make a vein pop up when you're trying to seal it, and it'll just be a little bit annoying to get it back down. But yeah, generally wash your hands and make sure there's no oil on them.
Yeah,
especially putting wraps on, they absolutely hate it.
And so once you've wrapped them, do you then have to clean your wraps before you go and stick your vanes to it?
Oh, unless you've touched them.
Okay.
Generally, the wraps I get through arrowwraps.com are pretty good. I think they've been bagged and boxed and all that kind of stuff pretty clean. So I've never really had an issue with the wraps as long as I physically don't touch the wrap when I'm rolling them on and make sure the surface I'm using is clean.
Okay. And then when it comes to actually gluing, like you use the Loctite 406.
Yep.
Is there other glues that you can, like, can you get that within Australia?
Yep, the Loctite 406 you can get. Pretty much every Repco holds it.
Okay.
A lot of places have it. I think Kmart and Target used to hold it as well. But you got like you got the Boning Platinum and a couple of other different styles. But I've always preferred to use the 406. It just seems like it sticks a lot faster and it holds them down a little bit longer. Yeah,
just a sturdy glue.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when it comes to actually gluing the vein on, do you have to do much in regards to cleaning the vein itself before you put it on?
Not with boning. They're all pre-primed.
Okay.
So every boning vein is pre-primed in the factory before it's boxed. I have had AAEs and AA Max. You have to use a prime pen. They're a different kind of material, but the 406 don't like them unless you use the AAE primer pen with them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you buy AAEs, make sure you buy a primer pen and buy some sort of glue like a 406 or a Platinum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when it comes to gluing it, it's really making sure that you're not putting too much glue on, right?
Yeah, it just needs a slight bead along that to cover the whole face or the whole foot off that vein to make it stick properly.
And if you get, say, patches of glue outside of where the vein's actually sitting, is that going to affect your flight?
It will a little bit if you've got like large droplets sitting there.
Yeah.
But generally, if you fletched and you can see them, you can just run your finger past them and wipe them off.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the 406, you get a little bit of beading sometimes down the sides, and sometimes when you do use excessively too much, you will get 4 or 5 big drops. So I generally just run my finger next to the vein and pull that big drops of super glue off. That just makes it nicer finish and nice and smooth for the air to travel over.
How long do you generally have? Like you chuck it in place, you do your 3 veins on it. How long do you have before you can move your arrow around without it being...
It comes down to temperatures, really. I find winter it's a lot harder to fletch than it is in summer. In summer, it's pretty much an instant click.
Yep.
So as soon as it's on, it's on. Maybe wait 2-3 seconds in summer. So if it's 30 degrees, the 406 instantly goes off.
Mm-hmm.
But colder nights, like 10, 12 degrees like we get here in Brisbane, it might take 5, maybe 15 seconds sometimes. And even then, it's not long enough. But
it's like a New South Wales summer, isn't it?
Yeah,
or Victorian summer.
They're a little bit. They have to be a little bit slower down there to do their fletching.
Yeah, definitely. Get the blow dryer out. Things like heat, can it strongly affect, like obviously if you're using a wrap, can that be highly affected by the heat that you're in? Like if you're up in Northern Territory, is that going to stuff up your arrows at all?
Yeah, it possibly could. Obviously, wraps are made like an adhesive, so the adhesive is going to go off at some kind of temperature. So if you've got your bow sitting in a car that's been locked up at Coles there in cans for the last 4 hours, I'm pretty sure your wraps are going to fall off.
Yeah.
But generally, you just keep it out of the sun, keep it out of the hot car.
Okay.
Keep it in the shade. But I think wraps in the Northern Territory, you probably have a few issues with it, especially if you're in the sun all day in that stinking heat. And
so when it comes to choosing whether to use wraps or not, like we were saying before we started recording, I'm pretty sure that you pretty much prefer the veins, not only for clean's sake, but also that you find that it's just better for them, for the arrow shafts, right? Yeah,
it just keeps the super glue off the shafts. And obviously super glue or any kind of glue is abrasive, so it's going to try and eat into the carbon shaft itself. And keeping that off the shaft is if obviously you pick your shaft up after shooting something with this, you can just pull a vein off and clean it all up and put it all straight back on. Just usability is just awesome.
When it comes to actually hunting an animal, and you've shot an arrow through an animal, what should you be looking for to whether you use that arrow again or not?
Just to make sure your wrap's not damaged and your veins aren't pretty much flapping around in the breeze. If they are, just retire that arrow and refletch it. Yeah.
And obviously, if it's good to go, you just clean it off and it's good to go?
Yeah, pretty much just clean it off and wash it and do what you need to it and go again.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. What haven't we really touched on in regards to like the basics of an arrow so far?
Oh, nothing too much. I think we're pretty good. Just consistency and spine and straightness.
Yeah, and so for someone who's just buying straight from a store or buying from someone like yourself, like how do they know whether that's a thing or not? They can't really.
You can't really tell unless you got like an analyzer or some sort of tester.
Yeah.
To check spine and deflection and stuff and straightness, but. Yeah, there's no real way to check unless you got a digital gauge or an old analog gauge.
Yeah. Okay. So realistically, if you're buying, like, unless it's from someone like yourself who's hand touching them all, going through them all,
Yeah, definitely.
hand analyzing, it's hard to kind of say, hey, it's going to be completely consistent.
Yep.
Okay, cool. When it comes to FOC, and this is probably something that's really big over in the States at the moment, front of center, I believe it stands for.
Yep.
It's talking about getting the heavier weight at the front of the arrow, so it pulls the arrow forward, essentially. So when you take your shot, it's constantly getting pulled into the direction that it needs to be in. And they say that it aims, it does a few things, so it makes for more accuracy, but it also hits the animal harder.
Yeah, it's the momentum of the arrow, I believe it is what makes it hit the animal harder. Obviously, a little bit of weight behind that arrow, a bit more weight than normal. The FOC actually helps create. Actually, if you've got a badly tuned bow, FOC will actually help that arrow fly a lot better.
Okay.
So a bit more weight up the front will make you.
So how do you change that? Just purely through your inserts?
Yep. So just purely just creating FOCs, just putting inserts in, extra weight up the front.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to size of your broadhead, and what I'm talking about is actual length and physical size of the head, does that make a big difference compared to if you're shooting a shorter, smaller broadhead?
I don't think so. Not overly. I think it'll probably find some sort of effect somewhere along the line, but I don't think it's a major pickup.
So the biggest thing comes down to purely the weight of the broadhead then?
Yeah, if the weight of the broadhead, because if they're 125s, it's 125. You might pick up a little bit of FOC by that broadhead being slightly longer, but it's not going to be as much as having half cert or something added onto the front.
Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to choosing a broadhead for your arrow setup, what dictates whether you should go 100 grain, 150 grain, 125, 175?
All personal preference. If you want to shoot 100 grains, 125s, 150s, or 175s, it all comes down to what you want out of an arrow and how heavy you want an arrow at the end of the day. If you want a really heavy setup, 175. You want a lighter, faster setup, 100 grain. So it comes down to the species that you're hunting as well. So if you're shooting Chiddle or chasing the fallow, they're agile and they'll pretty much just matrix out of the way of that arrow.
Duck anything, yeah.
So, maybe a little bit faster arrow for that kind of situation. Then if you're hunting pigs or something a little bit slower, a little bit docile, just a nice heavy arrow. Yeah. And so, obviously, having a heavy arrow is important. It is really good for hunting the animals and the critters that we have here in Australia. Yep.
What dictates if an arrow is too heavy?
Personal preference, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it all comes down to personal preference. Obviously, if you're running a too heavy arrow, you're going to notice a massive drop in that arrow from 30, 40 to 50. And you may not even have a 60-metre pin, may not even have a 50-metre pin, unless you're using a single slider or something like that drops out. But I think a heavy arrow in Australia, I don't think Australian animals need anything heavier than 550, 600 grain. I think that's where we're at.
Yeah.
With the heaviest thing. I know a lot of blokes are shooting a 450, 500 grain arrow at buff, and they're getting pass-throughs or three-quarter arrow pass-throughs. All shot placement as well. If you send it into the sweet spot, she's going to go out the other side, but if you clean that shoulder up, shot placement, you're just going to pull that arrow up a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And depending on what it is, like some of the pigs, apparently they just get some clay thickness to the sides of them.
Yeah, they get an inch and a half fighting pad, then they get an inch and a half of mud hanging off the side of them.
Yeah, so it just becomes pretty rough to get through some of those.
Yeah, definitely.
When it comes to actually shooting through bone, though, that is definitely something that can be done with the arrows and the broadheads we're using, right?
Yeah, definitely. You can break bone.
And obviously the rib cage is not a very thick bone in itself.
No.
But if you hit that shoulder bone, you're probably going to run, like the shoulder blade and the bone, you're probably going to run into a few issues.
Yeah, you can get deflections, and they used to call them the old fish hook, where the arrow would hit the shoulder blade and turn 90 degrees and come up out their back or somewhere. But that's just one of those freakish things that happen. Every animal's got a big shoulder blade. Yeah,
definitely. And so... is there much more we need to touch on in regards to arrow? That's pretty...
No, that's pretty much it,
Yeah, okay. For you, like when it comes to your setup and what you do with the arrows that you get through, so they come to you, there is a shaft already.
Yep.
What do you like? What's your process from start to finish when it comes to making an arrow, sending it out to someone?
Generally, at the moment I'm a little bit behind, so I kind of select that arrow first. So I go through it and check all the spine straightness and deflection and stuff. Make sure they're all within my tolerances that I want them to be, and then I batch them together in their dozens, 1 or 2 grain difference. Maybe sometimes they can be a 3 grain, but it's a bit touch and go. It's probably 2.5 grain. Then obviously add the Eastern X nocks, and that dozen's now been selected and batched in that 12, which is consistent.
Yep.
And then obviously go through and just clean the shaft with a little bit of cleaner and put the wrap on.
What cleaner are you using?
I actually use a little bit of shellite.
Shellite?
Shellite.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually like a turpentine.
Okay.
It just gets rid of grease really easily. You don't need a lot of it. Just a slight damp rag cleans where the carbon... Cleans the carbon off nicely where the wrap's going to sit down or where the vein's going to sit down. It just drags a little bit of dust out, and that makes it all perfectly clean for a vein to go on.
Yeah. Okay. And then from there, you just wrap it up and
wrap it, fletch it, then let it sit there for a little bit on the bench. Cut them down the length and add the half certs and use the shellite again within a cotton earbag cleaner to clean inside the shaft where the carbon residue would be after cutting it, and glue your inserts or your half certs, and pretty much that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And when it comes to someone like a recurve shooter, what's the major difference between, say, a carbon shaft or a wood shaft for them?
I don't really know.
Not
I
sure.
don't really know.
Yeah, that's cool.
The wood shafts, obviously, you got your Porthorter cedar. Wood shafts, if they want to go full trad, they'll be using some sort of decent wood shaft, I guess. Probably using the Port Arthur. And I'm not really too sure about the rest of it, to be honest. Like I haven't really shot much trad or had much to do with the trad, but most of the differences will be feathers because they'll be shooting off a shelf, so they won't be using vanes or a plastic vane. They'll be using a feather that lays down on the shot as it goes past the riser.
Okay.
Less knock to the arrow. That's really about all I know about wood.
Yeah, no, fair enough. That's good. It's obviously, it's like we were talking about before. There's just so much to learn when it comes to archery. Like I came in, you've got this whole setup here, and you talk about how you go to the archery range and you're constantly helping people.
Yep.
But then you get individuals like myself who this is the first time I'm trying to even put my arrows together. Like it's obviously a big learning curve from start to finish.
Yeah, definitely. But it is something that I think all archers should know how to do, is build and fix and repair and stuff on everything.
Yeah, last thing you want is to be out in the wild and not be able to do something or not be able to fix an arrow when you only got 2 arrows left. Yeah, definitely. Nothing worse than coming to the end of a quiver when you're out hunting.
Yeah. That's when you walk out and go home.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good time to leave it all. When it comes to yourself, your main deal is actually getting after the fallows, right?
Yep, definitely.
And so fallows mainly within Queensland?
No, mainly New South Wales, in the New England area.
Yeah, so kind of northern New South Wales
yep.
area. When it comes to the fallows, like what's kind of your game plan with them all? What do you do?
I don't have too much of a game plan. I just try and figure out their movements and their what they're doing on the day before or the day after, and try and slide into place and ambush. Just trying to read the animal, find the feed, just figure out what they're doing, really.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it just goes to shit.
Yeah, definitely. And, I mean, you've got a few different little, like, skull caps around the place with just some antlers here. What process did you go through to get them to that? Did you do it all yourself, or did you actually send it off to a taxidermist?
Yeah, generally, I do all the skull caps and that myself, obviously, and the tanning. We do the skinning and stuff ourselves, but I've got to make the tans for us.
Okay. How do you do the skinning? Like, oh, sorry, did you say you did do the tanning by itself?
No, I've got a mate that does the tanning.
Oh, sorry, okay. Skinning you do by yourself.
Yeah, the skinning and all that kind of stuff and fletching. Then I just pass it on to a mate, and he tans it all.
So let's talk about when you've skinned an animal. Like, what are you aiming to do when you know that you're going to use it as a rug?
Salt it.
Salt it straight away.
As much salt as you can get onto it.
But before that, the actual cutting process.
The cutting process is not to go too deep into the hide, and then just to clean all the fleshy bits off and make it nice and clean, so the salt can actually get to it.
So you pretty much just want to remove meat, is my understanding, right?
Meat and fat.
You do want to get the fat off.
Yeah, get the fat off, and that way the salt can actually get into the hide, so you don't get hair slip.
Okay, and so if you don't get rid of the fat, that's when you'll get things like the hair pulling out of places.
Yeah, you get a little bit of hair slip if you haven't tanned it quick enough, or if you haven't added like a second layer of salt, because your salt originally will pull all the moisture out of the hide. So once your moisture's out, obviously your salt's starting to go off a little bit, and just add more salt at that point.
How long do you have to salt it?
You probably long as the skin's colder than what the animal was sitting in.
Okay.
So you could probably salt it a day later or 2 days later, as long as it's no hotter than that 36.5 degrees that animal was.
Yeah, okay. My auntie's cousin is a taxidermist, and he just said, like, if you get one, just pop it straight into the freezer rather than salting it. So that's another way you could obviously do it.
That is another way. You can't just roll them up and freeze them.
Uh-huh.
We've never really done that because we haven't got room to freeze.
Yeah.
A hide takes a fair bit of room to freeze.
Yeah, definitely.
But we've always just carried 5 kilos of salt with us, and when we need it, we use it.
Okay. And so you'll typically try to do it on the day that you've skinned the animal, right?
Yeah, pretty much skin the animal, hang the hide up so it can dry out, and obviously if you're hunting, just leave it hung up in a tree somewhere and
With
come
a
back.
heavy amount of salt?
No salt at that point.
Okay,
just
yep.
let it drying out. So obviously skin the animal and let it dry and let it hang in the tree or somewhere that's out of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And come back a few hours later and wrap it up, take it out and salt it that night if you can.
Yeah, okay.
So generally try and salt it within the same day.
And once you've layered, like, it's pretty thick, the amount of salt you put on it, isn't it?
Oh, it's only just shaking it on there. So like a fellow hide, you'd probably use 4 kilos of salt
Okay.
if there's no fat on it. But
Yep.
if you got a little bit of fat left over, just in that section, just add
Put a little bit
shitload
extra.
of salt.
Yeah, okay. And then once you've done that, are you wrapping it back up?
Yeah, just folding it up into like a little purse-looking thing.
Yeah.
Wrapping
And
it
so,
up, so
making sure that you're not touching any skin to the fur then?
Yep.
Like
Yep,
the inner skin.
it doesn't matter too much. As long as the main issue with hair slip and stuff is when obviously the salt's dragging the moisture out. So if that skin can't drip moisture off, it's going to be sitting in its own juices, and that's going to be hair slip.
Okay.
So try and get it up off the ground again once you've rolled it up. Don't stick it in a plastic bag. Stick it in a bag that's going to allow it to drip like an old Hessian bag or something.
Yeah, or even one of your meat bags, right?
Yeah, meat bag, yeah.
Yeah, be perfect. And then from there, like, once you're salting it, you've actually got a fair bit of time before you have to take it to get it tanned, don't you?
Yeah, pretty much. You can do whatever you want with it, as long as your salt's good.
Yeah, and you're keeping it off the ground.
Yep.
Yeah.
Letting its own moisture drip, and change the salt over at some point, and just keep on top of it.
And so the skulls you said you've done yourself. Did
Yeah.
you boil the whole skull and then chop it, or do you chop it and then
We
boil
kind
the
of
skull?
chop then boil.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we don't take the whole euro mount. I just take the cap.
Yeah. And when it comes to the boiling side of things, are you actually wrapping your antlers up as well?
No, I've got a big enough pot that I haven't got an issue with flaming around the sides. I generally just use a little butane barbecue thing.
And so that's the only reason why you'd wrap is just because it could get burnt.
To get licked with flames or whatever.
I thought it was also because of the liquid.
I think the liquid
affect
and
it.
the steam kind of gets into it as well, makes it a bit softer. But if you haven't got massive amount of heat going up there and you've pretty much skull capped it, it's not much to boil.
Okay. And when you're boiling it, like, is there a point that you can boil it too much? Like, obviously, it turns to brittle eventually. Like if you're doing a broth.
I've never. I suppose I boil it to the point where everything falls off it.
Okay.
So I've never really boiled it massively.
And how long is that, roughly?
Probably an hour and a half.
Okay.
Yeah. More than that.
And so you've got it boiling constantly, or is it more like a simmer?
Like a simmer.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a bubble, slow bubble.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. No, it's cool. Obviously that's a whole nother realm, and I actually had some people reach out saying, "Hey, I'd love to know more about that." So I do want to get a taxidermist on and get chatting about that stuff as well. But it's just cool. Well, we've obviously right here, and you've got it all in around the shed. I thought I may as well ask.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely get a taxidermist in. I'm sure they'll tell you a lot more than what I could.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit green with this kind of stuff, but we get enough done, and it seems to always last.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, if there was anything else that you wanted to, or is there anything else that you think we should touch on in regards to arrows and
I think we're
setup?
Pretty good setup.
Yeah, cool. I think that's it. Kind of gives a little bit more insight as to what you should be looking for, the things you should be doing. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I think like the best thing to do is, depending on where you're buying your arrows from, is just to reach out to the buyer, I mean, to the seller as well, right? Like I said, reaching out to you was probably the best thing I did because it just took away any second guessing that I had.
Yeah, definitely look at a consistent arrow. Like consistency in arrows is going to make your shooting a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to the seller and find out what those arrows are, what straightness they are, what spine they are. You go out and you spend $2,500 on a bow setup, and then you go buy $80 for the arrows. You can't be really consistent, can you?
Yeah, exactly.
You need to back it up with a decent arrow instead of going budget on the projectile.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's the thing that's doing the deed.
Yep.
So
definitely.
it is worthwhile investing in. And I know it like from my perspective, getting into it, it's just cost after cost after cost. But really, then that's what it probably starts like for all beginners, to be willing to go and spend the money. But don't make the mistake of going and buying the shitty arrows to start with, because like Shane's saying, like they're not consistent.
Just throwing money away.
Well, that's exactly what I did. Like I literally bought, I think, what would have been like 5 to 6 dozen of arrows before I got onto your stuff. And since being with you, I've only had 2 dozen arrows because I've purely just shot through them.
Yep.
And I mean, that wasn't due to, no, it is, some of it's due to helping other people get into bow hunting and losing some arrows too. So, I mean,
metal detector on those ones.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get onto that. That's a really good idea. But cool. Well, I guess if people want to buy from you, they can go to bowhuntersdomain.com.au. Yeah. Reach out to you on Instagram, which is also at bowhunters_domain.
Yeah, bowhunters_domain.
Yeah.
And Facebook's the same, Bowhunters Domain.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, thanks very much for having me, man.
No, it's good to talk.
Appreciate it. That's it, guys. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Becoming a Bow Hunter. You guys can follow along with the journey at becomingabowhunter.podcast on Instagram and Facebook. You can also head across to the YouTube channel, which is Becoming a Bow Hunter. So guys, follow along. We've got a whole heap of different recipe videos up there, as well as different snippets from along the way, along the journey so far. If you guys do enjoy the show, please pass it around. If you got something out of this show, then I'm sure another bow hunter, another friend of yours would get a hell of a lot out of it as well. So please share the love, share the podcast, and thank you so much for tuning in.